Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org. Hi, this is Bill Kenower of Author Magazine, and we're here at Elliott Bay Book Company in Seattle, Washington with Bruce Holbert, author of Lonesome Animals. Bruce, welcome to Author.
Thanks for having me.
So Bruce, can you remember the first time you understood that story, just the concept of story, mattered to you?
I have an interesting relationship with story, actually. I see it as a kind of a demon.
Demon?
Part of this book, Lonesome Animals, is about the damage story does. That we've got a mythology in the West that encourages men to act like criminals. And it's dysfunctional. I'm a high school teacher, and I see kids, I deal with kids who have a hard time. And they're walking around acting like Clint Eastwood, even though they don't know it. And they're living by the rules of these stories that they've been brought up with, and they don't understand they have choices to step away from that stuff.
Right.
And so my relationship with story is, I mean, obviously I love story, but I think that, I look at it with a sort of critical eye. I think the first time I felt connected to writing, I remember I was in, I think, 4th grade, and we had a substitute teacher who was a very kind woman, and she substituted a lot in our classroom. And one day she handed back a paper to me and said, "You know, you're a writer." And I've just never thought of myself as anything else since, you know.
You know, it's interesting what you say about story. I forget who the poet was who said, the universe is not made of molecules, but it's made of small stories.
Yeah.
It's made of stories. And for human beings, I feel that's good and bad. That's absolutely true. They're living a story. Those boys you're describing are living the story of, you know, the vigilante justice, I assume, their vision of vigilante justice.
There's a new theory actually in counseling called narrative therapy, which I'm playing with in my classrooms. I work with a guy who's knows more about it than I do. But the theory is to have kids tell their stories, recognize what's going on in them, and then be able to ask the question, is this a story I want to be in? You know, and you know, if not, then which characters do I take out, or how can I change his story, or what do I like about the story? And the key thing as far as being a teacher is that they feel like they have some control, then it's not just happening to them. And sometimes I think story, especially the old myths and the religious stories that hang with us, that I think they happen to us. I don't think that I don't think we realize the force that they're, you know, the forces that are working on us through those stories. And I think sometimes it's dangerous.
And so Lonesome Animals is about, in part, the West and a lot of the mythologies we've been talking about. Does that feel like a place, as a storyteller, you'd like to dwell for a while, or is this, I've done this, now I've got to move on to urban life? Or?
It seems like a thing I keep coming back to. A lot of what I've written about tends to reside in that area. I mean, I grew up in the West. My great-grandfather homesteaded, and I grew up with it, and I grew up with the horrors of it too. My great-grandfather murdered my grandfather, and
seriously,
yeah, that's where that's where this book comes from.
Wow.
I was trying to figure out, my great-grandfather's name is Straw, and the main character's name in this book is Straw, and I was trying to figure out how he could do that. And so I came up with this guy who had the capacity to do that, but was also in some ways human and breakable. And it was in a way, it was a chance to sort of revisit that. There are very few facts that are available from that murder, but I mean, my dad grew up without a grandfather and a dad.
Wow.
And so as a dad, he was always guessing with me, and you know,
he guessed wrong a few times, maybe.
He's an awfully good parent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he's the one thing that I know that I found as a parent is most of the time when you make a mistake, it's because you're afraid. You know, I get mad at the kids because they get a bad grade on a test. Well, I'm really afraid I haven't done a good enough job of taking care of them. I think maybe he was a lot of times he doubted himself, and that I think that I included that in a scene. There's one, or in an essay I talked about one time when he spanked me, and there's something in me realized that part of the reason he was spanking me, I mean, I deserved it. I was being a pain in the neck, but part of the reason he spanked me as long as he did was because he wasn't sure when he should stop. He wasn't sure he even should be doing it, and because of that, he was in as much pain as I was, really. And
prior to Lonesome Animals, which is your first published novel, you had written and published short stories in literary journals and such, and done some nonfiction work also. Yeah. What was the biggest sort of surprise once you moved to the long form, when you moved off shorter form work?
Oh, well, I believe Raymond Carver said a short story is a lot more like a poem than it is like a novel. Yeah. And I think that's true, that novels are sustained, and there's a kind of momentum you have to be able to generate that is sort of beyond structure, beyond just structure. And I suppose that was the thing that drew me to it, was that I seemed to be able to create that momentum, and it seemed to pull me through my work, and I seemed to be comfortable with it.
What did you learn writing Lonesome Animals that you're going to take to your next project, your next book?
I suppose one of the things that I learned was, and this is because I have a very good editor, Dan Smetanka, who's just, you know, he really made the book a better book. I learned to turn things up.
Turn things up?
Yeah, and part of being a Westerner is that we mute everything. Yeah. And he was always encouraging me. No, this needs to be, you know, there needs to be more anger here. There needs to be, you know, in some places it needs to be bloodier. You know, he says if you're going to write a violent book, man, it's got to be violent. It can't just, you know, you can't just mute the violence because of the tone. And so what I had to learn to do is to navigate characters that mute their emotions, to navigate in their heads a little bit more. And I think that's been a real step forward for me.
So I'd like you to finish this sentence for me. If writing has taught me anything, it has taught me what?
Boy. I would say it has taught me that there's no simple explanation.